it's funny when you visit another church, how they have different ways of doing things, right? So I really messed up Ron's church because they, he'll do an altar call, and then what happens is he'll send people over to a prayer room if they want prayer, but no one ever goes in there. So they got like 15 prayer warriors in this prayer room that no one ever goes to, right? So second service, I'm like going, man, I'm gonna kind of push the altar call. And I actually gave the same message that I gave the week before, and I was talking about taking off grave clothes, and just gave a lot of challenge on that. And so I brought out all their prayer warriors, and we put them across the front. And they're like, really? Like, Ron doesn't do this? I'm like, well, Ron's not here, kind of thing. And, but it was really, it was funny. But it was neat, though, because a lot of people did come up for prayer. I think probably at least 50 people, maybe more, came up for prayer. And it's just a real sweet, neat time. And it's just good to kind of mix the pot a little bit every so often. So, but it was a really neat, sweet time. And then we got to hang out with one of their assistant pastors, and he's this retired guy that's just awesome to hang out with. So we didn't get back until really late, but it was a blessing of a time. Anyways, we're in Ruth Chapter 4 this evening. Ruth Chapter 4. Don't give him any money for it. Anyway, so we're in the book of Ruth, which is an interesting book, and it really has a specific purpose. It's really showing us kind of the legalese behind the way Jesus could redeem the earth. And we're looking at this thing called the Goel, or the kinsman redeemer. Okay? So what happens, and it'll come out again in the study, but what happened was this family was living in Bethlehem, just south of Judea, just south of Jerusalem there. And Bethlehem is known as the house of bread. It's kind of the first place that as you're coming out of the desert, out of the area that you can't have a lot of crops in, you come to this place that has a little bit more rain. And so they called it the house of bread. It's David's hometown, and we'll see why, because we're talking about the ancestors of David. And so it was given, though, to drought, because it's right on the edge. And Corpus is very much the same way, right? Here it's feast or famine. It's either a swamp and you got alligators in your front yard, or you're growing cactus, right? And that's how it is here. And it's pretty much the same, not exactly the same. It's not as humid there, but it is either good rainy season or not. And so they went through a famine, and there was this guy that we don't see him praying, we don't see him seeking the Lord, and that's always bad news when you do that. And it always leads you into trouble. So this man who had 2 sons and a wife, he took off, and he bailed out of Bethlehem, and he went across the Jordan River Valley, and he went up into the hills of the area called Moab. And Moab is not a place where God wants you to hang out, because the Moabites had been enemies throughout the history of the nation of Israel. They were the ones that sent Balaam. Remember Balaam on his talking donkey went to curse the people? They had hired Balaam to curse the Israelites. But this man doesn't pray. He doesn't seek the Lord on this drought situation that he's facing in Bethlehem, and he takes his 2 sons out. Now, we know that this guy was not like a sparky, great personality either, because he names his son Sick and Tired. That's what he actually named his sons in the Hebrew. And it was very interesting. Ruth was actually named, wed to Sick. So he spent 10 years there. His sons were older when he showed this lack of faith, and he moved out there with his wife. But the man dies. Elimelech dies, and then his 2 sons get married. But then his 2 sons die. And with names like Sick and Tired, I don't know if they were really sick and tired and they just outed themselves or whatever, but they died. And so now you have 3 women that are widows, and that's not a good thing in any ancient culture, because they were mostly led by men, and women didn't have a whole lot of work for finances in those days. And so Naomi, being Jewish, thought, you know what, I need to go home to my people, and maybe I can just beg there. Because the problem is, as a female, without having a son, she couldn't go claim her inheritance. She wasn't allowed to. Only a male heir was allowed to claim the inheritance. And so she comes back, and her daughters-in-law loved her. And so they stuck with her. But after a while, Ruth Naomi thinks about this, and she's looking at her daughters-in-law, and they're young, and they haven't had any children yet. And she says, go back to your own people. And Ruth basically says, I don't want to go back to my own people. And we see that she actually makes a step of faith, and she wants to become a believer. And we talked about that. God doesn't recognize race. God recognizes faith or lack of faith. And that's what he sees. You're not supposed to be unequally yoked to an unbeliever. It's not about the color and pigment of your skin or the curliness of your hair. It has nothing to do with that. It's all about whether you have faith or not. And so, my wife is part Jewish, and she has light eyes and light hair. Go figure. How does that work out? Well, because they migrated and married into different groups in Northern Europe, where my family, or where my wife's family was from Poland there, she ended up being Jewish but having fair skin. Because you could convert to become a Jew. And that's what God always looks at. Now, prior to this, we had seen that happen before, because there was a woman named Rahab, and her heritage was a Canaanite. Have you ever heard anything good about the Canaanites? Not a whole lot of good about the Canaanites. But this woman, who's also a prostitute, not necessarily the best biblical profession either, but she comes to believe in the God of the Jews. And she's living in the city of Jericho, and she's rescued. And she ends up being an ancestor of Jesus Christ, because she becomes a believer. And so we are looking at that. So anyways, Ruth becomes a believer. And she will not leave Naomi, and she promises Naomi, man, your people will be my people, your God will be my God. And I'm going to stick by you until death do us part, man. I'm your daughter-in-law, but I'm not only your daughter-in-law, I'm receiving your God. And so Ruth comes along with Naomi. Now, Naomi shows up in town. It's her hometown. Oh, is that you, Naomi? She says, don't call me Naomi, which means joyful. She says, call me Mara, which means sadness. Right? So I think her not-so-happy husband has rubbed off on her a little bit, and she's not looking at life in such a good way. She doesn't have a dependent, and then she has this foreigner with her. What's she going to do? And so what ends up happening is they enter into what poor people would enter into. They go behind the people that would collect the harvest, and they collected seed. They collected the grain as they followed behind the people collecting the harvest. It was harvest time. And so she worked for the full 2 months during this time. And the owner of the field started to notice her, because she was a beautiful young lady who had a really good work ethic. She not only had beautiful physical appearance, she had beautiful character, and that is the thing people don't look for today is character, because beauty fades and character grows, right? And so you invest in someone's character, and so he notices her, and he happens to be a Goel. He's a kinsman redeemer. And so we see that this man has really good character as well. He knows that this woman is a hard worker. He knows that she's supporting a widow. And so he's giving her extra grain as well. And so they are getting to know each other during this time. It wasn't just her throwing herself at him. So when it came time to actually thresh the barley that they were harvesting, the owner of the harvest would actually sleep where they would thresh it, and the reason is because that would be the best time to steal it, right? All the work's done, and you have all the grain pellets that are there to steal. And so he would sleep there, and she went and she basically slept by his feet and told him to cover me. And this idea of covering, male covering over a woman, means that I will take care of you. I will bring you into my life, and if it works out, it's the marrying. It means marriage, but it also means protection, because you would take people under your care as a way of social welfare as well. And so widows weren't just left out. They were taken under the wing of someone, and they would live there and be taken care of. But she says, put your covering over me. And we're covered by the shadow of the Lord's wings. It's the same picture. And Jesus cried over Jerusalem. And he said, man, I've so wished to have you under my protection. And that's what she's saying. I want to be your wife. I see character in you. So it turns out that this man can redeem her, because she was married to a relative of his. So he's a relative. He's a Goel. He's someone that could redeem her. And if he redeems her, he ends up redeeming her land as well that belonged to her husband. So she's being adopted in. And then if she's adopted in as the widow of a relative, she gets to redeem all the land back. And lo and behold, Naomi will also redeem everything back as well and gain all the more by being married into this good family. And so that's kind of where we've gotten to this point. And now we're coming to chapter 4, which is the culmination of the story. And this is the story that tells us our story, because we are redeemed by a Goel, a kinsman redeemer. And that'll become clear as we go through this chapter. Okay? So Ruth chapter 4, verse 1. Now Boaz. Boaz is the guy that's the close relative, or the relative to be able to redeem her. Went up to the gate, and he sat down there. And behold, a close relative of whom Boaz had spoken came by. So Boaz said, "Come aside, friend, and sit down here." So he came aside, and he sat down. And so Boaz goes to the gate of the city, and it's not just a gate like you might think it's a gate, like just a gate. So everybody hangs out by the gate. Well, the gate of the city was the town hall, the jail, the sheriff's office, the mayor's office, whatever. It was where you went to do business. Why? Because in those days you would bring, people would come into your city, and your city, oftentimes the main part of your city would be walled because you were trying to protect yourself from attack. And then what would happen is when caravans would be traveling, they would come in to seek protection inside of your city, and they would have to pass through the main gate. And if you were coming into the city, they would take taxes off of what produce you were bringing in or whatever. So the main gate was a big deal. If you go with us to Israel, we'll go to the city, the ancient city of Dan, and you can see how they had the gate arranged so people couldn't rush the city. And there, you can see all these ancient ruins of offices everywhere. It's also where the local mall would be, and people would sell things and all kinds of stuff. So it's like the busy place, but it's where official business would take place. And so he's there. He has the right to redeem this woman and his relative's land, okay? Because they found out that he had died, okay? And so Boaz is this relative that can actually redeem this land, this woman, and her mother-in-law. But there is a relative that is closer. And so he has second rights to redeem this woman, okay? He went to the first guy, and he says, "Do you want the land?" The guy says, "Yeah, I want the land. Of course I want the land." He goes, "But it comes at a price. There's a woman that comes with it." He's like, "Nah, I don't want it." Okay? So he had already made a deal with this guy who he's talking to here. And the interesting thing is we don't know this guy's name, because this guy passed up on the opportunity. And we're going to see that he was fearful, and we're going to see that he was actually radically shirking his responsibilities. We'll see that a little bit later, okay? And so when Boaz jumps in, he's jumping in, and the society might not like it, and he's taking a chance on this woman, and he's taking a chance on this land, but he feels like the Lord's leading him to do it. And it's interesting that when you walk with God, sometimes you actually got to put it out there and take a chance. We don't follow a safe God or a tame God. That's from the Chronicles of Narnia. He's not a tame lion, one of the girls said about Aslan, who represented Jesus Christ. But I would say that about the Lord. When you follow after the Lord, some people say, "I don't want to walk with God because he might make me a missionary in Zimbabwe." I have to say that? Yeah, he could. He could. And you'd love every moment of it. And you'd feel driven to do that if that's what God called you to do. Right? And the best way to live with God is to be able to live as a sojourner and be able to say, "Whatever you want me to do, God." I know Linda always gets mad at me when I say, "Hey, I'm ready to go. If God calls me out of here, I'm gone. I'm not looking for a way out. I love being here. But if God calls me out, I'm gone." Because you got to be willing. Now, don't throw anything at me, Linda. You guys hold her back if she reaches the stage. She always does this. But anyways, so we need to live like that. Could you imagine if the whole church always lived like that? "I don't want to walk with God. He might make me sell my house and live in a trailer and minister to the Indians on a reservation." Well, praise God. You'd love every minute of it. You would love every minute of it. God might make me tithe half of my money. He might do that too. And you would love every minute of it and be absolutely radically blessed for doing it. Why not? We live such a short time on this earth compared to eternity. Isn't it just a pencil mark on eternity? And we don't get it because we put such great value on the things of the world, and we don't invest our time, our energy, our mind, our love, our passion towards God. And we look at everything else. We care more about football than we care about heaven. You know, and so we're not willing to walk away. You know, it's funny. For years, I thought I could never go to a place where I couldn't surf. So God just punished me by taking me a place that's by the ocean, and there's not a whole lot of surf, you know? But I could go someplace where there isn't surf now because I've grown a little bit. I've grown a little bit. You know, wherever God wants me to be, that's where I want to be. Sometimes it takes rest. Theodore Roosevelt says this: "It is not the critic who counts, nor the person who points out where the doer of deeds could have done better. The credit belongs to the person who's actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs and comes up short again and again, who knows the great enthusiasms, the devotions, and spends himself or herself in a worthy cause, who at best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and at the worst at least fails while daring greatly, so that his or her place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat." We don't live safe. I mean, I love watching extreme sports, and, you know, sports marketing was my thing when I was backslidden, because I wanted to be involved in the surfing industry and skateboarding, motocross, and all the crazy stuff like that. And I love watching that, but I'm like, why aren't Christians the most radical when it comes to doing things as unto the Lord? Right? We always want to live safe instead of radical, you know, and stepping out in faith, you know, and why can't God do it? You know, years ago we thought, like, we can't send our daughter to Baylor. We're not poor enough for them to pay for it. We're not rich enough to pay for it. Right? I mean, and basically, through a lot of work and writing of a lot of essays and signing up for a lot of scholarships, out of a $200,000 education, we got $186,000 of that $200,000 education paid for by a lot of prayer and putting work where our prayer was, and believing that God would provide scholarships for our daughter. And we got through it. I wish we had $14,000 more faith, but we didn't. You know, that's our lesson. So we pay monthly on that, you know. God could have done that. But man, that's craziness, right? We were wondering how we were going to go visit my daughter in Greece, and we didn't put that in the church budget. And, you know, we're real careful with the budget and how much we use for me to go on mission trips and stuff like that, you know, even though we're very much missions-minded church. You know, I'm very careful about that. At the same time, some guy walked up to me 2 weeks in a row and handed me money and said, "Bless your daughter." So then I called him up. I said, "Can we bless my daughter with us going over to Greece?" You know, with the money that you gave? And he goes, "Yeah." And so we're able to go to Greece to visit my daughter. And it wasn't because you directly paid through your tithes, or it wasn't because, you know, we're independently wealthy. It was because God provided. You know, things like that happen all the time, guys. It's just, you know, if you're willing to live radically and just say, "God, whatever you want, that's what I want to do." You know, so here's this guy, and he thinks, you know, I'm a little bit older, and here's this young girl, and I'm ready to redeem her, and I'm ready to start my family. And that's what you're leading me to do, God. Regardless of what anybody else thinks, I'm going to do what you have led me to do. So here he goes. So Ruth 4:2, it says, "Then he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, 'Sit down here.' So they sat down." They're having this official meeting. Now, normally it's 2 or 3 witnesses, right? New Testament, Old Testament, 2 or 3 witnesses to make a deal. Important deals take more witnesses. So he brings 10 men to witness his situation. Verse 3, "Then he said to the close relative, the other kinsman redeemer, 'Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, sold the piece of land which belonged to your brother Elimelech. And I thought to inform you, saying, buy it back in the presence of the inhabitants of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not redeem it, then tell me, that I may know. For there is no one but you to redeem it.' and I am next after you. So that was the idea. This guy's closer, so he has the first shot at it. Then Boaz said, on the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you must also buy it from Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of the dead, to perpetuate the name of the dead through his inheritance. So Boaz tells him, there's more to the deal than just buying the land. There's a young lady in the mix. You can understand from last chapter that the relative wants the field, but not the young lady. I don't know that Boaz could care about the field, but he wants the young lady. And so he will buy the field to get the price. There's a story that Jesus told in Matthew 13:44. It says, again, the kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field, which a man found and hid, and for joy over it he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. And so that the Lord would be able to redeem some, he paid the purchase price for all. Do you guys realize that? He died for the sins of the whole world, didn't he? That he might redeem the some. And that's you and I. So he put it all on the line. He gave it all. And that's what that parable means. Jesus thinks you're a treasure. And so he purchased the whole world with his own blood in order to get you. But it says in Ruth chapter 4, verse 6, it says, and the close relative said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I ruin my own inheritance. You redeem my right of redemption for yourself, for I cannot redeem it. Now understand, under law, he could redeem it. He could redeem it. Now here's what would happen with a family name. He would redeem the land, and this was a part of the law. He would redeem the land. He would purchase the land back, and he would get this woman, and it was a close relative. And so he was responsible to actually impregnate her, not as his wife necessarily, but he was to impregnate her so she could have a baby to carry on his dead relative's name. And that was a law in the Bible because God cared so much about family and family inheritance of the land. And so he would continue his name. Okay? And so that was the responsibility of a goel. Now, if he was already married with children of his own, and his wife didn't like that, he's going, I can't do it. But legally, he actually could. Perhaps he didn't want to divide his inheritance amongst more children. Maybe he had children already, and he didn't want to divide the children further with this other child. Maybe he didn't want to be associated with a Moabitess, right? Everybody would have looked at him funny. Perhaps he thought Ruth had a curse with her because her husband had died before. I don't know. But he said, I won't redeem it. Not, I can't. He could. Legally, he could. So he could do it, but he would not do it. Now, verse 7 goes on and reveals a little bit more about the situation. It says, now, as was custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging, to confirm anything, one man took off his sandal and gave it to the other. And this was a confirmation in Israel. Therefore, the close relative said to Boaz, buy it for yourself. So he took off his sandal. Now, this was like, in Ruth's and Boaz's day, this was just like a handshake. This had become like a custom. But understand, we're talking about a law in Deuteronomy. It's called the Levirate law. And there was way more to it than just taking off your shoe and kind of shaking the shoe together. Okay? Deuteronomy chapter 25, starting at verse 8, it says, then the elders of the city shall call him and speak to him. But if he stands firm and says, I do not want to take her, my relative's widow, okay? I do not want to take her. Then his brother's wife, his relative's wife, shall come to him in the presence of the elders, remove his sandal from his foot, spit in his face, and answer and say, so it shall be done to the man who will not build up his brother's house. and his name shall be called in Israel the house of him who had his sandal removed. So you see, the deal is, if you're not willing to do what God had told you to do, you're supposed to be shamed publicly. And that's what was supposed to be happening here. But they really backed off of that. So you need to understand, this guy's name is not written because he wasn't worthy enough to be written in the scriptures, because he's disobeying what God would have him do. But I think God in his providence is able to take man's rebellion and still do something wonderfully, incredibly beautiful out of it. Because you see this relationship develop between Boaz and Ruth, which isn't just a contractuary relationship. They actually wanted to marry each other. And so it's a beautiful thing. But it was to be a humiliation, not just a taking off of the shoe. So many things, guys. And I want you to think about this. What they did in their cultures, they took something that was very shameful and they made it acceptable. Sound familiar? And that was the downfall of a nation, because it wasn't just this issue. It was every issue that God gave them. They stopped listening to, and it wasn't important. You know, so often when I do marriage counseling, I look at young couples and I just go, you know what, you need to stop whatever you're doing right now so God can honor your marriage. Because it's so acceptable to just sleep together like it's no big deal. You think God changed his mind? Read James. It says there's no changing, no shifting of shadows, no turning of the Lord ever. What was good then is good now. Purity is still good. It's still in fashion in heaven. And I want to get there fashionable. No, just kidding. But you know what I mean? I want to be wearing holy clothes, man. And if you think I'm a nerd because my wife and I didn't have sex before we got married, you might think I'm a nerd, but God thinks something about you. Right? You know, it's like, so what? And we've got to be at that place. Not that we don't care, because we want to love people. But when they're criticizing our God, we don't have to quiver and quake and give in. Because what God says is good. Oh, that means you hate homosexuals and homosexuals. No, it doesn't. We love people because that's a command. It's the greatest. That's a fulfillment of the law. And so I don't care what you struggle with, man. You need to be saved. And God will deal with what you struggle with just like he dealt with what I struggle with. You know? It's like, come on, don't throw homosexuality in God's face. Like, you know what? God can save you even if you struggle with homosexuality. Yeah, you need to be saved. Oh, but I'm homosexual. Well, great. You need to be saved. You know? It's like, oh, I'm a thief. Oh, great. You need to be saved. I'm an adulterer. Great. You need to be saved. I'm a molester. Great. You need to be saved. I'm a covetous. Great. You need to be saved. You just need to be saved. And he came to save sinners. So all you're saying is, I'm a sinner. I can't be saved. No, that's what Jesus came to do, right? He came to save sinners. And so we don't have to compromise with the world. And they'll say, well, you can't do this. And I go, no. I say, I don't want to do that anymore. You can't stop doing it. So who's happier? You know, you can't drink. Well, no, I don't have to drink. You know, you can't sleep around. No, I don't have to go that way. You can't. No, I don't want to. You know. So don't compromise. And this guy was compromising. Their whole culture had gotten to the time where it's just shaking hands over a shoe. Instead of like taking the shoe off and spitting in the guy's face and giving him a curse. Verse 9, and Boaz said to the elders and all the people, you are witnesses this day that I have bought all that was in Elimelech's and all that was Chilions and Mahlon's from the hand of Naomi. Moreover, Ruth the Moabitess, the widow of Mahlon, sick was his name, I have acquired as my wife to perpetuate the name of the dead through his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brethren and from his position at the gate. You are witnesses this day. And so he acquired her as a wife. Guys, she went from living a slave's life to being a wife. She was following behind the the harvesters, and just picking up the leftovers. And then she goes to being this man's wife. She was, in a sense, in bondage or slavery, and she had this great debt. She couldn't buy back the land. She wasn't even allowed to buy back the land. She had no money to buy back the land, and she wasn't allowed to because she was a woman and not a blood relative. You know what? We're in that same lot. We're under bondage to sin. We're not in a place to pay off our own sin. And we couldn't even pay it off because it cost us death. And that's done. We're done then, right? And so we need a Redeemer. The qualifications of a Redeemer is that he has to be a near kinsman. Why did God come as a man? And why did he have to be 100% man? Because he had to come as a kinsman. You know, the Jehovah's Witnesses would say Jesus was an angel. He's not an angel. He came as a man. The Gnostics would say, you know, the Spirit just came upon him for a short time, but he wasn't really God in the flesh. Well, if he was a mere man, he couldn't redeem himself. He'd be in the same boat we are. So he had to be a man. He had to be a near kinsman. It says in Hebrews 2:14, inasmuch as the children have partaken of flesh and blood, he himself likewise shared in the same, that through death he might destroy him who had the power of death, that is, the devil, and release those who through the fear of death were all lifetime subject to bondage. And so he has to be a near kinsman, and he shared in the flesh with us. He came as a man. Now, a kinsman, as we saw, needs to be willing to pay the price. And the other guy wasn't willing to pay the price, was he? Mr. No Name. Bummer. But you know what? Jesus wanted to redeem us. Now, the question would be, why did he want to redeem us? And when we're first believers, we think, oh, God, you got a good deal. And then we learn a little bit more about ourselves and a little bit more about God. Then we realize, okay. I don't know why you saved me, but you did. And he was willing to pay the price. Hebrews 12, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. And so Jesus knew how much the cross would hurt. Not just physically, but I think emotionally being betrayed. Love was betrayed. Like, that's bizarre, right? But spiritually, right? God looked upon him as though he were the sin of the whole world. So emotionally, physically, and spiritually, he suffered at the cross. And he knew how much it was going to cost, so much so that he was in the garden praying. It was so stressful that blood came out of his skin. He was under such strain. So he knew how hard it would be. But he looked beyond the cross and he saw your sweet little face. This is while you were yet a sinner. He didn't see your sweet little face. He saw your teeth gnashing in rebellion against him, and he still chose to love you. That's an incredible Savior. He has to be willing to pay the price. Third point, he has to be able to pay the price. And so you could have this poor relative who couldn't buy the land and get Naomi, but he couldn't pay the price, so he wouldn't have gotten her. And Jesus was able to pay the price. 1 Peter 1:18 and 19, knowing that you were not redeemed with corruptible things like silver or gold from your aimless conduct, received by the tradition from your fathers, but with the precious blood of Christ, as a lamb without blemish and without spot. His blood was enough. He was able. How can we be redeemed? Well, we have to go to Jesus. We can be redeemed by Jesus. Now there's another interesting correlation to this idea of the kinsman redeemer, or someone who can redeem something from a relative who lost it. And in the garden, when Adam chose to follow Satan instead of walk in the cool of the day with Jesus, he chose to follow Satan and believe him. He handed over, in a sense, the dominion of mankind to Satan. He doomed man to be born separated from God. Jesus Christ, actually the law kind of allowed some type of connection there, but Jesus Christ finalized it. Right? He brought it together. Faith always gave somewhat of a relationship because it was believing in the future redemption, and God sees past and future. So an Old Testament faithful person could have somewhat of a relationship with God. But we don't have to look forward like that, shadowy. We get to look back and see it done. He completely made that connection back. And so it was lost in the garden, and Jesus spiritually reclaimed it, and eventually, physically, he will also reclaim it like a kinsman redeemer because he's related to Adam, right? And so he's able to redeem it. Now, if you have your Bibles, turn to Revelation chapter 4 with me, two of my favorite chapters in the Bible because it reveals the throne room of God and also the legal redemption of the earth. Revelation is the last book in the Bible, in case you're looking. Okay, Revelation chapter 4. And I'm going to go ahead and start reading at verse 1 because it's just a cool chapter. But what we're looking at is in chapter 5. But Revelation chapter 4, it says, "After these things I looked, and behold, a door standing up in heaven. And the first voice which I heard was like a trumpet speaking with me, saying, 'Come up here, and I will show you the things which must take place after this.'" Now, a whole different study, but I believe that's the point of the rapture. I believe John is a part of the church, and he's called to go up into heaven, and then he spends time in heaven while crazy things happen on earth. So, verse 2, "Immediately I was in the Spirit, and behold, a throne set in heaven, and one who sat on the throne. And he who sat there was like jasper and sardis stone in appearance, and there was a rainbow around the throne, in appearance like an emerald. And around their throne were 24 thrones. And on the thrones I saw 24 elders sitting clothed in white robes, and they had crowns of gold on their head. And from the throne proceeding lightnings and thunderings and voices. 7 lamps of fire were burning before the throne, which are the 7 spirits of God." And so you have God the Father on the throne. You have the 7 spirits, or the completeness of God's Spirit before the throne. And it says, "Before the throne there was a sea of glass like crystal. And in the midst of the throne and around the throne were 4 living creatures full of eyes front and back. The first living creature was like a lion. The second living creature was like a calf. The third creature had a face like a man. And the fourth living creature was like a flying eagle. The 4 living creatures, each having 6 wings, were full of eyes around and within. And they do not rest, day or night, saying, 'Holy, holy, holy,'" Trinity, right? Father, Son, Spirit. "Holy, holy, holy, Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come." Whenever the living creatures give glory and honor and thanks to him who sits on the throne, who lives forever and ever, the 24 elders fall down before him who sits on the throne and worship him who lives forever and ever, and cast their crowns before the throne, saying, "You are worthy, O Lord, to receive glory, honor, and power, for you created all things, and by your will they exist and were created." Chapter 5, "And I saw in the right hand of him who sat on the throne a scroll written inside and on the back, sealed with 7 seals. Then I saw a strong angel proclaiming with a loud voice, 'Who is worthy to open the scroll and to loose its seals?'" Who is qualified to come and redeem? And I believe this is a deed. I believe it's a title deed to the earth. "Who is worthy to open the scroll and to loose its seals?" And no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth was able to open the scroll or to look at it. Here's a problem. You have God the Father there, but he's not able to look and fulfill the scroll. But see, God the Father never lived as a man. He's not a kinsman redeemer. Same with the Spirit of God. We have the 24 elders, and I believe that represents the church there, and possibly New Testament governmental church and Old Testament governmental family of faith, possibly. But you have these 24 elders, and the problem is they didn't live a completely pure life. They had been redeemed as sinners. So they can't redeem it back themselves because mankind had lost it. They were not able. And so you have God the Father, God the Spirit, and then these 24 elders. These guys are righteous. These guys haven't been completely righteous. So you have a problem here, don't you? Because you have to be able, not only willing, but able to open the scroll, and they're not able to redeem it. Right? But what happens? It says, verse 4, "So I wept much, because no one was found worthy to open and read the scroll or to look at it. But one of the elders said to me, 'Do not weep. Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has prevailed to open the scroll and to loose its 7 seals.' And I looked, and I behold, in the midst of the throne and of the 4 living creatures, and in the midst of the elders stood a lamb, as though it had been slain, having 7 horns, completeness of strength, and 7 eyes, completeness of knowledge, which are the 7 spirits of God sent out into all the earth. And he came and he took the scroll out of the right hand of him who sat on the throne. He was able, guys, to be the Goel. You see how cool that is? You see why God included that book of Ruth in there, so that we would absolutely, completely understand this idea of redemption and redeeming. Guys, not only is she a woman in an ancient culture, which is not good to be a widow in an ancient culture. She's a widow in an ancient culture. She's also a foreigner. Man, she's the worst of the worst, right? And what happens? She's absolutely, completely redeemed. Verse 11, back in Ruth Chapter 4, goes on, and it says, "And all the people who were at the gate and the elders said, 'We are witnesses. The Lord make the woman who is coming to your house like Rachel and Leah, the 2 who built the house of Israel.'" They're saying, have a lot of babies. "And may you prosper in Ephrathah and be famous in Bethlehem." There's the same thing. Fruitful and house of bread is what they mean. It's the same place, same city. "May your house be like the house of Perez, who Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring which the Lord will give you from this young woman." And so they're blessing Naomi. So may you be like Rachel and Leah, again, the women that gave the children to Jacob or Israel. And then it talks about Perez and Tamar. It says, "Would be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah." Tamar was Judah's daughter-in-law. Okay? Kinsman redeemer. Judah's oldest son marries this woman, and he dies. The next brother would not take her and produce children for Judah. The next brother would not do this and take children for Judah. And then all of a sudden, here's Tamar. She has no children, but the law says she needs to be redeemed. And so she hid like a prostitute, and he went into her and he gave birth to Perez through her. And so he ended up being his own daughter-in-law's redeemer, kinsman redeemer. And it was through trickery, and it's not what God would have ordained, but God deals and he fulfills his plan, even though we try to mess it up all along the way. How would have God done it had the sons not messed up? He would have done it some way, okay? He would have had it done, but it would have been done righteously. But his things are still going to be done, but he has to deal with our sin. That's what makes him amazing, okay? So another situation where you see this kinsman redeemer. And so these are all, this whole tribe of Judah is descendants of Tamar and Judah himself. Okay. Verse 13, "So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife, and when he went into her, the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. Then the woman said to Naomi, 'Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a close relative, that his name may be famous in Israel.'" And so here we have women blessing the women. And remember, Naomi said, "Don't call me Naomi, call me Mara." And now she is being redeemed. And the blessing continues in verse 15. "And may it be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age, for your daughter-in-law, who loves you, who is better to you than 7 sons, has bore him." You're blessed, Naomi. And you have this daughter-in-law, Ruth, who is better than any son you could have had, because she has blessed you abundantly. God is able to bless you even though it seems dark. I don't know how many times in my life I decided it's all over, it's a mess, I've screwed it up so bad. And God comes along and still blesses me. He is a redeemer. That's what he does. Joel 2:25, "So I will restore to you the years that the swarming locusts have eaten." And the blessing of being a pastor is I get to watch out in people's lives all the time. And it's such a beautiful, wonderful thing. Think about Joseph in the Bible. You think after his brothers threw him in the pit, he's thinking, okay, this is good. This is good. No, it wasn't good. But then he's in the house of this guy, and he works his way up, as a slave, and he's being in charge of his whole household. This is good. This is good. Then his wife accuses him of rape. This is bad. This is not good, And then he's in the prison. Then he works his way up in the prison, and he's in charge of everything in the prison. And then he's got the baker and the cupbearer, and they give him all these promises, and he can trust in them. This is good. This is good. 2 years later, he's thinking, they forgot about me. This is bad. But God redeemed him. And Joseph had a positive attitude about it. And he named his sons blessings of a names because he had a good attitude about it. So Naomi thought it was all bad, that she was missing out on what was right in front of her. She should have worked with what she had and trusted God with what she had. Don't miss out on the treasures that are right in front of you. Get in the habit of counting your blessings often. You've been around people that just complain about everything, and it's such a bummer to be around them. Make sure you're not one of those people. Make sure that you lift up others. And you know what? The power of a negative statement is you can't just work your way out of it in the flesh. It's powerful. It drags you down no matter what. You know how you work your way out of it? With the Lord. And if you work with someone that's a downer, you got to be with the Lord all the more. And you got to fight that, and you count your blessings. Count them. If your job is hard right now, you still got to be with the Lord and count your blessings. Keep on counting those blessings because God has not left you without. There are treasures in your life that you may be ignorant of. And you start to see them once you start thanking God for them. When you start off your prayers with thankfulness, sometimes your whole prayer is thankfulness. It's neat how that works out. Try it. Verse 16, then Naomi took the child and laid him on her bosom, and she became a nurse to him. Also, the neighbor woman gave him a name, saying, there's a son born to Naomi, and they call his name Obed. He is the father of Jesse, the father of David. So Obed becomes David's grandpa. How cool is that? This little baby becomes David's grandpa. Ruth is David's great-grandma, the Moabitess. So his name is Obed. It means serving. Remember, these two other sons were sick and tired? This kid's name is serving. He's a servant. One thing about serving is a character of God. When you're selfish, you're an exact opposite of the character of God. God served you. Jesus came not to be served, but to serve and give his life a ransom for many. Verse 18. So this is a genealogy of Perez. Perez begot Hezron, and Hezron begot Ram. Ram begot Amminadab, and Amminadab begot Nahshon, and Nahshon begot Salmon. Salmon begot Boaz. Boaz begot Obed. Obed begot Jesse, and Jesse begot David. One who did not belong now belongs and becomes a part of the plan through the kinsman redeemer. What would Ruth's life be without the kinsman redeemer? Slavery, right? Treachery. What would your life be without the kinsman redeemer? You got to thank God for that, right? Sorrow to rejoicing. You were a beggar, and now you're a belonger. You're no longer just begging. You're no longer searching. You're one who has the rights to the throne room of your Father. I have no idea what time it is. Maybe my iPad might tell me. It's so smart. 8:12, perfect. Okay, so what I want to do is I want you guys just to think about it. We'll sing a song. And then I just want to spend a few moments with you guys telling me what you were and what God has made you. Maybe what you saw yourself as and now what you see yourself as now. You guys understand what I'm saying? Ruth, or Naomi, was sorrowful, and now she's a rejoicer. You know, for me, I was selfish, and don't get me wrong, I know I'm still selfish, but I'm much more of a servant than I ever was and ever could imagine being, to care about you more than surfing, right? You know, to give up a career to be at people's beck and call is not a part of my DNA, guys. But I so love the fact that God has done something in me. You see what I'm saying? And So we're gonna worship. You guys don't have to stand up, but we'll worship to a song, and then I'm gonna give you guys an opportunity just to share, and we'll just go around the room, and it'll encourage some of you who are going through hard times right now and feeling like there's no bright spot. But I want you to think about how you would describe yourself before, and then afterwards. Okay? So let's go ahead and worship the Lord.